So now that we have the lighting and post-processing done, let's go about actually adding some camera tracks that can show off everything that we've done to anyone that wants to actually check out the environment. The reason being is that at the moment if I hit play, we're going to become a disembodied head that can fly through the world using WASD controls, and that's not particularly great. Instead, what we want to do is go ahead and have some cameras that kind of do some nice, like just slow moves around the world. They can highlight certain aspects that we're particularly proud of, etc., etc., etc. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, to do it, I need to go Cinematics, Add Level Sequence. And then I'm going to make Sequences section, and I'm going to make one that's called SEQ underscore demo map camera demo. Yeah, that'll do. So with that added, it opens us up the sequencer tab. Now, if yours is opened up in the middle of the screen, that's fine. All you need to do is hold click and just drag this down. And I've connected mine to where my content browser is here, but you can set it up to whatever you fancy. Now, whenever I use sequencer, I try to think of it in terms of using seconds instead of frames. So for any of you wondering what sequencer is, it essentially lets you grab any actor in the game and manipulate it in any way, and then keyframe those manipulations. Now what that means we can do is get a camera, drop it into the scene, move it around in various different ways at different times, and we've created ourselves a nice, smooth camera track. So, to get started with that, what I'm going to do is put my camera about where I would like to have, this camera based. Like to begin with. And I'd really like to do like a slow pan that begins here and then kind of comes out and shows the rest of the room. So I'm going to start it facing the wall. The next thing I'm going to do is click on this button here that says create a new camera at the current cut. I'm going to make sure that key all channels is selected, and I'm also going to go ahead and make sure that auto key all is also selected. Okay? Now with that in mind, what we're able to do is if you make sure this button here is checked as well, I know there's a few things that you had to check, but this, and this are the three. Then what happens is anything I do with the camera is now going to be copied. So if I was to put the camera, if I was to wiggle it around and put the camera, actually I'm going to move it backwards and just have it here, you'll see that a little keyframe appeared on my transform. If I was to scrub up in time to say 5 seconds and move the camera to here, then, when I was to scrub back through, you can now see that the camera's moving between them. If I want to play this, I can always press spacebar, and it'll play it in real time. So this is a good start, but obviously we want to do something that's longer than 5 seconds. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to set the working range end and the end frame to be higher numbers. So I'm going to say 20 seconds is probably a good point. If you put it in the end frame, it'll automatically extend the working range. So we've now set ourselves up for 20 seconds of video. The other thing I'm going to do is get this red line here and just drag it to the end. So now that we've got the first section, let's kind of get this camera just following through and doing something vaguely interesting. Let's say at the 10-second mark, we now want the camera to be... Let's put it up into the top corner, kind of looking at the room. Now if I play this, the camera's now going to go up and smoothly move to that point in the room. Now, it looks alright at the moment, but we could probably tweak this a little bit. I wouldn't mind if that move up was a little bit slower. Rather than adding that frame in another way, I can just drag the keyframe that I added up to here, about the 12-second mark, at which point we're now moving at this speed instead. So we've got our movement track working here, but at times I'd really like to be looking more at the scene. So midway through the track, I can just kind of move the view direction down a little bit, at which point, when I hit spacebar, we're going to cleanly move between here. It's now going to be focusing more on the couches and such, and then it's going to move up to here. And I can do this as many times as I like. So if I want to get this midpoint and make sure that it's a little more focused, I can. So spacebar. So that's a nice initial cut, but let's go ahead and change some of the other issues that we're having. So if I go to this and I look at this scene, one of the big things that's clearly a bit of an issue is the focus. And you'll see that if I look over here, I have manual focus distance, which actually allows me to, there we go. So you see that as I tweak it, we can actually change what the camera is focused on within this. So I'm going to bring this back at this scene to about the 4 or 5 meter mark, so about 496. And when I let go, I can go to here, I can add a keyframe. So that's now at the 5 meter mark. At the beginning, we probably want to actually focus on the cracks that are inside the screen. So I'm going to set this initial value to be something else. So I'm again going to drag this back until we get something that's very close to the frame. So I think it's about 20 or 30 centimeters. No, take it back. It's 112. There you go. So you can see that these cracks are now visible. And it's going to, as I play the thing, it's going to blend those two focal distances between blending on the wall to now blending out to focus on the cracks. And as I go through, I'm going to kind of adjust this focal distance to kind of make sure that we're really centered on the aspects that we want to. I think about there is quite nice. Get a bit of the grit coming in on the. There we go. And again, we can also modify other settings such as focal length or camera aperture. This all depends on the kind of view that we really want to have at the time. I personally always start with just doing my transforms, and then I kind of go from there, but everyone's got their own workflow. So if I get up to here, so this is the final shot, I really want to make sure that this is actually all synced up. First thing I'm going to do is actually just move this a little bit further down so it's a little better in terms of framing. Yep. And then I'm going to go ahead and modify the focal distance as well. Let's be about there. And I might actually increase the focal length by just a little bit. So because I've never keyframed the focal length before, when I typed in the number, it did it for the entire channel. But if I go to here and I hit set that as 40, and then I go back and I set the focal length here to be 35, it's now going to automatically add a keyframe as I go through. So that's going to slowly adjust the focal length over the course of the shot. Which, to be honest, I don't entirely mind. Now, that's one way to go about doing this, but what if we wanted to cut between multiple cameras? Well, I'll show you. So at the moment, we've got this camera here, and it's kind of going out to about there. Let's say during the shot, I wanted to have the camera doing something more interesting. I can actually do that pretty easily. I'm going to uncheck this, so unchecking the lock, and let's just find something else that we kind of want to focus on that could be good. So I'm going to add a nice downwards shot that's about here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new camera at the current camera cut, at which point it's popped in a new camera at this location. And you can see that we now have Cine Camera Actor 2 and Cine Camera Actor. So for this location, let's go ahead and actually start kind of tweaking this and getting things together. For this initial shot, let's make sure that the focal distance is set to a good distance again. So I'm going to bring it so that it's kind of focused on the couch. And I'm going to add a keyframe for that. Now we're going to have this moving sideways. So I'm going to set my transform. And again, auto keying's enabled. I'm first going to add an initial transform by just clicking there. And then at the 15-second mark, let's have moved it to, say, about here. So that's now moving. And my focal distance at this point is going to be way closer because I want to see those blocks. My focal distance at this point, though, is still going to be reasonably high. There you go. So now that last second, it kind of snaps in. And that feels alright. So with this basic camera track working, we're now playing between here and here. And the cool part of this is instead of focusing on the camera actor, if I go up to here and I go lock viewport to camera cuts, you can see that when I hit spacebar, it starts with the first camera and then it cuts over to the second camera. Now the second camera is not yet moving, so it's a good idea for us to kind of adjust where these cuts are and how we want to have things structured. So I'm going to go ahead and add some camera cuts in here that will just be a little bit nicer. So to do this, all I need to do is click on here at any stage and just click add camera, and I can add in a cut and choose which camera I want it to cut to at that time. So obviously I've created a little bit of a mess here. So I'm going to delete these initial cuts, and I'm going to tell it to run Cine Camera 1 up until we get to about here. So I'm going to drag that across. It's now going to start by doing this. And we probably want to switch to the other camera at about this stage as an example. So if I was to hit add camera, camera 2, it's now going to go. So if I play this, you'll see. Now, because of how things were structured just then, I actually think it's better for the camera that we come into to already be moving. So I've moved it just a second up. Another thing that might be kind of nice here is instead of popping from one to the other, let's actually add a fade track. So if I go add fade track, you see that we've got this. And if I go to this section just here, I can hit enter, and I can set this to be a fade of 0. And if I go to here, enter, I can set this to be a fade of 1. And then if I go to here, enter, fade of 0. You'll now see that when it gets to these, it's going to just black out between the two. And now for good measure, I'm just going to add a third camera that's going to be the last section of this. It's also worth noting that if you want to get into like more in-depth sequences, you can actually add sequences to sequences. So if I wanted to set up an entire shot with everything going nicely, I could add that and then use a shot track to add various subsequences kind of going on within it. Okay? So with that in mind, I've now got that set up, and I'm going to add my last camera. So I'm going to go camera cuts. I'm going to go ahead and decouple my screen from the Cine actor. And for my last shot, I think it'd be nice if I had something that was... okay, so we're going to start down here, which means I'm going to go add new camera. And I'm going to go transform and just add the current transform there. I'm going to lock this to my current camera. It's already selected. And at about the 18-second mark, I really want to be up here. And what we're going to do is now when I watch that, it's going to start here and go to here. And the fun thing with this is that my focal distance is going to initially be up close. And then by the time we get to here, what we're going to do is about a second beforehand. I'm going to keep this reasonably low. So this is going to be a focal distance. It's still kind of focusing on the couch. But then by the time we finish the shot, I then want to push this to be far focused. Probably a better idea for me to go like 600, so that kind of fades in. You can now see that this is going in. Now those were my initial shots, and if I look at how I've kind of lined them up with the rest of this, I can see that I've probably been a little over eager in how I set things up. So I'm going to set this to end at the 22-second mark instead. And I'm going to get all of these frames that I just added, and I'm just going to move them along. So I'm just going to select you, drag selects, and I'm just going to push them up to here. And if I go up to my camera cuts, I'm going to add this other camera cut just here. Actually, let me just have a quick preview as to how this looks overall. We start here, we work to here. Oh, whoops, I see what's happened. When I added the other camera cut, I removed my initial one. Camera cut 2 is going to be at that point. And then this shot's going to come in about... so that stays at the exact 15-second mark. So I might as well just add it there for... so camera cut. I'm going to cut to the most recent camera. At which point It's going to look like this. Yep. And then it's going to focus at the end. Yep. So the only thing I can think of that I'd really want to do is I'm going to go fade. Just going to add a dark fade location there. At this point, I'm going to add a 0th fade. Fade out again. And then at the very end of the shot, I'm just going to fade to black again. It's all over the course of 1 second. If you feel like having, you know, more specific snaps, you can set this to be whatever you would like it to be. I'm going to set the fade. So we're going to fade in as well for that first second. At which point, if I view this, we fade out. That was a good trick. Cool. So that's the beginning of our scene, and if we want it to loop, we can set it up to loop. So I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So now that the sequence is set up and working and that everything looks good, the last thing that we're going to need to do to make sure that this plays is to simply go to our world outliner and do a search for our sequence. So I know mine's called seq_demo map, and if I click on that, I can now just go down to autoplay and set a play rate, and I'm just going to tell it to loop indefinitely. And now, if I would hit play, it would automatically work. So that's it for the sequence. Stick around. The next part is going to be final touches, as well as beginning with particle effects and IES profiles.